So, are you still stalling, or did you fall for one of the two classic blunders? An important milestone has been achieved in the President's American Rescue Plan to transition the pandemic to an endemic, or winding down the path of destruction wrought by an invisible enemy and novel coronavirus that emerged in China in December 2019. Since, as of yesterday, over half of American adults had been fully vaccinated, the final push, they say, in flattening the curve. And it is supposed to be all downhill from here, right? Well, the actual science casts some doubt upon that if you read science. And like Vizzini in The Princess Bride, you may have fallen for one of the two classic blunders. Never get involved in a land war in Asia, and never go against a Sicilian when death is on the line. If you recall, the evil genius Vizzini fell victim to the pirate Wesley, who had defeated his giant, indicating his strength, and defeated his Spaniard, demonstrating his intelligence. But in a final battle of wits, he tells the fair princess, the Princess Wesley that is, that for several years he had been consuming small portions of deadly iocane powder from Australia until he developed an immunity, right? The pirate Wesley was teaching you science in a children's movie, and you probably were having such a good time popping back kernels of popcorn while sipping on Kool-Aid without even knowing the flavor. The pirate Wesley sat down in that challenge at the table without disclosing his vaccine passport, right? A little sneaky. And the science is actually called mithridatism, introducing small quantities of a foreign substance to prepare your immune responses to identify and defeat its corrosive effects or preventing the development of a disease condition. It actually works. But I would posit that there is solid science to back it up, that the pirate Wesley could actually have died in that little experiment for one of two reasons. First, had he miscalculated the quantity of poison to put in the wine, his immune system would not have been at the level required to attack that quantum of pathogen. Oops, little error, a little bit too little. The immune response would have been triggered, but with insufficient force. Like the National Guard being deployed to call in to take out Rambo. Okay, you have a force, you have a reactionary force, but they can't defeat Rambo. And second, you'll even discover this bit of science in the most recent science reports on herd immunity, a term that has been around for over a century, even if you never heard about it, but you probably just only learned it recently. The immunity that the pirate Wesley had attained through mithridatism, ingesting small quantities of iocane powder, may have waned over time, not having the full effect that he had wanted to achieve. You may be familiar with this science if you annually get another flu shot to prevent getting just the normal flu. So Private Wesley's for the past year, your Vizzini was a novel coronavirus. But half of all adults decided to take a chance on getting vaccinated to prevent falling victims to a novel coronavirus, a term that has actually been around and is not new since 1932 in animals, chickens in fact, and since 1965. In humans, the human coronavirus, OC229E, which we all know, which scientists quickly discovered appeared most akin to chicken coronaviruses, probably because we were around chickens so long, that causes avian bronchitis in chickens and causes respiratory tract infection symptoms in humans, but which generally lack the bandwidth to be a sole pathogen to make you sick. For those who missed the class, that respiratory tract is infections, are those infections that arise by a pathogen generally entering your nose or mouth by breathing, not by eating. Two different systems. We had some folks who CDC had to remind of that science factoid with a cartoon to demonstrate the proper wear of a non-medical grade facial covering last August. So this is just a quick review for those who may be a little behind on the reading. And remember, if you still having problems with this material, you're going to have a very hard problem passing the final exam. And the question is, if you fell for one of the classic blunders, starting a land war in Asia or going in against a Sicilian when death was on the line. If we use the EUA, Emergency Use Authorization, and the Defense Production Act, you know or should have known that you were being given a preventive measure to fight off a biological weapon of terror. And this particular invisible enemy has been consistently validated to have a less than 5% secondary attack rate, or 95 out of 100 people in the general population who come into contact with this biological weapon will have no infections at all, as they average things out, basically, when it is deployed. Results may vary depending on where you are attacked. You may not find that number at 5%, less than 5% infectious rate, if you just look at individual case studies. But overall, this is what it averages out to. 100% of folks in a 30 square meter kill zone in a Chinese restaurant aged 20 to 84 and seated in an area breathing in COVID-19 for over an hour received so much pathogen that 100% were hospitalized. You may have heard a little bit about this study. We started talking about this when we started transitioning from the idea of droplet transmission to aerosols. Of the 10 folks infected, the index case, or person who was already infected, who had already been infected on a prior occasion, which should mean he had some level of immune response already, right? Mithridatism, he's got ingested, boom, which should mean that he already had an immune response, received so much exposure that immediately after he left the restaurant, he began to develop full symptomatic presentations and had to be hospitalized. Had to go to the hospital. It's a guy who had immune response already. He had to go to the hospital. But the vaccine is supposed to reduce your chances for hospitalization, right? Why did it not work for him? And he actually had COVID-19. Sure, if COVID-19 was a normal communicable disease being transmitted from person to person, but if it is being deployed in a 145 square foot dining room with 93 people, including 8 staff members, the Chinese restaurant study confirms that if you were immersed in a cloud of colorless and odorless gas from a smoke grenade in the kill zone, regardless of whatever little vaccine you got or prior exposure to get an infection, you wasted your damn time because you will get infected. And if the exposure is sufficient enough, you will go to the hospital and maybe even still die. Sailors aboard the Theodore Roosevelt were reinfected in less than 2 months. Remember that science completely blew off validating causation of COVID-19 through Koch's postulates, which scientists, real scientists, have been using since the 1870s when Dr. Robert Koch began playing with anthrax to see how it worked under a microscope, not long after the Civil War. And by just performing those 4 validating tests, we would have readily known exactly what the infectious dose is for COVID-19, or the quantity that any preventative measure has to defeat. Why didn't scientists do that? And had you done your homework like a good student, this should not be news to you and pretty much shatters your dreams of what has been incorrectly called herd immunity. Scientist term. Trying to play scientist, you got to know exactly what these terms mean. Kind of like law. Real scientists have known about herd immunity for over a century, even if it's new to you. And it is simply exposure of a sufficient portion of a community or population to essentially drown its possibility of spreading, like wetting down areas of a burning building or burning fields cuts off the fuel for a raging fire, giving it nowhere to go, closing the door. And that preventative blocking of pathogen's opportunity to establish a foothold elsewhere is actually called, by a real scientist, the herd effect. Not herd immunity, herd effect. A person with immunity from prior exposure or vaccine is included in herd immunity, but the rest enjoy the herd effect. So write that science factoid down for the test. That's why you don't make the mistake again, look stupid in front of a scientist. In fact, all of the evolving science on herd immunity actually is founded upon what is referred to as reproductive number, or R0. You might have heard this term, R0, R25, a measure of infectiousness that has been expressly rejected by the CDC. A lot of folks are saying R of 2.5, which means it's 60% get the herd immunity. Actually, 60% have herd immunity, but then everybody else enjoys the herd effect because it is inaccurate and subject to manipulation based upon a wide range of assumptions. Kind of like the assumption that the New York Times had published on the Royal Society study on masks, where their assumption was that one-ply cotton was 95% impervious to microbial particles. They soon withdrew and deleted that article after we kind of pointed that out. For accuracy, real scientists discard reproductive number and use secondary attack rate, which we derive from the examination of close trace contacts, which even the nation's only physician serving as a state governor decided in a deadly pandemic to completely blow off after being told 3 times back in January of 2020 to begin ramping those capabilities up. In fact, when Dr. Mohammed Norman Oliver, the state health commissioner, declared his public health emergency, his communicable disease of public health threat, communicable disease, not biological weapon, communicable disease of public health threat 1 month too early, before we had any laboratory confirmed cases. He was early on the declaration, but decided in February to blow off trace contacts until May, and didn't hire from over 6,000 resumes for 1,300 positions, a total of 168 by June. But of course, you were entitled to a second opinion. And of course, these are not opinions, these are actually facts, but you can get a second opinion. And I pray you do some research first and not simply do what you were told because it sounds like science to you, as too many people do in a pandemic. And that's why people get sick and die. As of April 20th, the White House has passed a deadline for responding to our Florida request to determine if the ever-elusive secondary attack rate and infectious dose for COVID-19 is classified information. And it's a trick question because the president can only classify that information if COVID-19 is owned by the government. Today, the governor, Ralph Northam, remains in evasion of both the sheriff and the United States Marshal. 2 counts of felony. Put him in jail for 20 years. In the first filed and longest surviving litigations against lockdown orders, which the World Health Organization told the world not to do. Told them not to do. And the facial coverings, which the NIOSH had to definitively determine were battle ineffective, using the same diagnostic equipment that we used to rate the N95 a decade ago. A report that, of course, you read. But just yesterday, Governor Northam was at Tyson's Corner in CVS trying to sell more folks like you on getting vaccines. And would it have changed your mind at all if you had been informed about any of this or done the homework, since it has not even been reported in the press? This is a no-brainer, folks. It doesn't get any easier than this. My name is Major Mike Webb. By God, I am running for Arlington Public School Board. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. End of the day, I really don't give a damn. It's not my department, honest. And y'all go back now. Here.